Mother-in-law kept guilt-tripping me for not eating her Indian cooking, so I started bringing my own dishes and giving her the same treatment. Now she's suddenly not hungry too. I don't know what it is about some people, but they just have to feel like they're in control of everything. My mother-in-law, she's one of those people. Always has to be the one calling the shots, the one making the decisions, and God forbid you challenge her on anything. But her obsession with her cooking, that's where things really started to go off the rails. My husband's mom is one of those people who thinks she's a Michelin star chef just waiting to be discovered. Her kitchen might as well be her stage, and every meal she makes is her big performance. You'd think she was feeding royalty with the way she brags about her dishes. Now don't get me wrong, I know a lot of Indian food is incredible, but here's the thing, I didn't grow up with that kind of cooking. My family's Chinese, and while I'll absolutely try new things, a lot of her dishes are just too much for me. The spices hit me like a brick wall sometimes. I'm talking dishes so loaded with heat that my tongue feels like it's been dunked in battery acid. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but sometimes I genuinely can't stomach it. From the very first time I met her, she made a point to tell me she hated Chinese food. Not, it's not my favorite, or I'm not too familiar with it. Straight up hated. The way she said it too, like she was daring me to get offended. I remember standing there awkwardly, pretending like I hadn't just been slapped in the face. Over time, her cooking became her go-to way of showing dominance. If we visited her house, there was no polite offer like, "Hey, are you guys hungry?" Nope. Her food was the plan. Whether you wanted it or not, she was putting a plate in front of you and watching like a hawk to see if you'd finish it. Most of the time, I'd just nibble a little and claim I wasn't that hungry. Sometimes I'd pick out the milder stuff and quietly hope she wouldn't notice. But the problem? She always noticed. "Oh, so you don't like my cooking?" she'd say, sounding way too offended for someone who wasn't even eating her own food. Or she'd hit me with, "Everyone else loves it. Why don't you?" Every visit felt like some twisted guilt trip. My husband tried to step in a few times telling her to leave it alone, but she'd always brush him off like she hadn't just steamrolled me with her passive-aggressive comments. I put up with it for longer than I should have. I didn't want to cause a scene, and I figured she'd ease up eventually. Spoiler alert, she didn't. If anything, she got worse. One time we showed up after driving 3 hours to visit her. I was exhausted, my stomach was already in knots, and all I wanted was some toast or something simple. Of course, she had a feast lined up. Steaming bowls of curry, masala dishes loaded with heat, some kind of spicy yogurt dip that looked like molten lava. I tried to keep things calm, told her I wasn't very hungry, smiled politely, and grabbed a glass of water. And that's when she did it. Stood right by the table and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Guess my food isn't good enough for you." I didn't say anything, I was too tired to deal with her games. But she didn't stop. She kept making little comments, tossing in digs about how some people didn't know how to appreciate good food. Every time I picked up my drink or glanced away from my plate, she'd chuckle to herself like she'd just won a round in some twisted game. I wanted to scream. The next day, I snapped. I was so done being treated like this. So the next time we went over there, I brought my own food. I walked in with my own Tupperware container filled with dumplings I'd made from scratch. I didn't even ask if it was okay. Just popped the lid off and set them on the table like it was no big deal. "Oh," I said with a smile, "I'm so excited for you to try my cooking. I really hope you like it." She looked at my dumplings like I'd dropped a dead fish on the table. She didn't say anything right away, just kind of forced this weird smile and went back to fussing over her food. When we sat down, I grabbed a plate and served myself my dumplings. No guilt tripping, no awkward excuses, just me, casually enjoying my own meal. About halfway through, I noticed her barely touching her food. She poked at her curry like she was hoping it would vanish if she stared hard enough. "You're not eating?" I asked, pretending to be all concerned. "Oh, I'm just not that hungry," she mumbled. I almost laughed. I couldn't help myself. I leaned in a little and said, "You don't like my cooking?" She didn't answer, just muttered something about eating later and got up to grab more water. It was perfect. Since that day, her comments stopped. No more guilt trips, no more snide remarks about her food being the greatest thing on earth. I don't know if she's embarrassed or just bored of trying to push me, but whatever the reason, I'm finally able to visit without feeling like I'm about to be interrogated at dinner. But here's the thing. I have this weird feeling she's not done yet. The way she keeps looking at me when we visit, like she's just waiting for something. I don't know what she's cooking up, no pun intended, but I'm not about to let my guard down. I should have known things wouldn't stay quiet for long. My mother-in-law may have stopped hounding me to eat her food, but that didn't mean she was done with whatever twisted mind games she had going on. For a while, things seemed manageable. We'd visit, she'd pretend not to notice me eating my own food, and that was that. It was awkward, sure, but at least I wasn't being grilled about why I wasn't wolfing down her blisteringly spicy dishes anymore. But I could tell something was brewing. She didn't give up that easily. Every visit, I'd catch her side-eyeing me or randomly fussing with her pots like she was thinking about saying something but couldn't quite figure out how to start. It felt like I was just waiting for her next move, and honestly, I should have braced myself harder. One weekend, we were invited over for what she called a family lunch. Nothing unusual about that. She'd done it before, and it usually just meant we'd sit there while she forced everyone to praise her cooking. I brought my own food again, just in case. The moment we walked in, something felt off. She was in the kitchen, but there was way too much noise. Metal clanking, cupboard doors slamming, pans banging around like she was putting on a whole production. My husband asked if she needed help, but she waved him off and kept making a racket. When we finally sat down, she walked in carrying this huge metal serving dish, grinning like she'd just won a prize. It was some kind of massive biryani platter, and she practically shoved it into the middle of the table like it was supposed to be the centerpiece. Before anyone could start serving themselves, she started talking about how special this dish was, how she'd spent all morning cooking, how she'd gotten the best spices, how she'd made it with love for the whole family to enjoy. She kept glancing at me like she was daring me to refuse. I knew what she was doing. She'd deliberately put together something flashy to get everyone talking about how amazing her cooking was, just so I'd feel embarrassed pulling out my Tupperware. Fine, I wasn't playing her game. I grabbed my dumplings from my bag, quietly set them on my plate, and went about my business. That's when she started digging in harder, loudly talking about how some people didn't understand authentic cooking, how real flavors required a sophisticated palate, how certain people were so spoiled they couldn't appreciate proper home-cooked food. I kept my head down, ignored her, and kept eating. My husband shot me a look like he was about to say something, but I gave him a small shake of my head. I didn't need him jumping in. This was exactly what she wanted. Then things escalated. She started passing her biryani down the table, making sure everyone got a big portion, and when she reached me, she stopped. She actually set the spoon down and told me straight-faced that it would be rude if I didn't at least try it. I tried to laugh it off, told her I was fine with what I had. She just stared like she was daring me to argue. The whole table went quiet. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I'd had enough. I grabbed the spoon, scooped the tiniest bit onto my plate, barely enough to fill a teaspoon, and said something like, "There, now nobody can say I didn't try it." She actually smirked like she'd won something. I took one bite and I knew something was off. It wasn't just spicy, it was wrong. The flavor hit weird, like it was loaded with way too much salt or something bitter mixed in. My tongue felt dry almost instantly, and it was way hotter than anything I'd ever had from her before. I put my fork down and grabbed my drink. Before I could say anything, she jumped in, loudly saying, "See? Not so bad, right?" Like she'd caught me admitting defeat. I didn't want to make a scene, but I knew she'd done something. That dish wasn't just overly spiced, it felt deliberate, like she'd gone out of her way to make it unbearable. I pushed my plate aside and went back to my dumplings. She kept grinning like she'd just pulled off some genius trick. Nobody else seemed to notice anything wrong, though my husband shot me another look, clearly worried. Later, when we were leaving, my husband asked me what was wrong. I told him flat out, his mom had done something to the food. He tried to brush it off, saying I was probably just imagining it or that I wasn't used to the spices, but I wasn't buying it. I couldn't prove it, but I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until a few days later that things got worse. I was at home when I got a call from his aunt, the one who'd been at lunch that day. She sounded weird, like she was embarrassed to be calling. She asked if I'd been feeling sick since the visit. I told her no, and that's when she told me her husband had been vomiting all night after eating that biryani. He'd been so sick they almost took him to the hospital. The weirdest part? Everyone else had been fine, except me, and I was the only one who barely ate any of it. That's when it clicked. Whatever my mother-in-law had done, it hadn't just been to mess with me. Whether she botched the recipe on purpose or just lost her mind trying to prove something, her own family had gotten caught in the crossfire. I told my husband everything. At first, he kept saying she wouldn't do something like that, but after I mentioned his uncle being sick too, I could see the doubt creeping in. We both agreed to stay quiet for now. There was no point accusing her without proof, but from that point on, I didn't just bring my own food to her house. I refused to eat anything she cooked. That's when she really started spiraling. Whatever game she was playing, she wasn't finished yet. And the next thing she pulled, it was worse than anything I'd seen coming. After the whole biryani stunt, I knew my mother-in-law wasn't finished. She was too stubborn to let things go, especially after she realized I wasn't going to cave. I figured she'd try something petty, maybe start ignoring me completely or play innocent while making some passive-aggressive comments. But what she pulled next, I never expected it. A few weeks later, we were invited to her house again, this time for some kind of family gathering, not just a casual lunch, an actual event. Extended family was coming over, some from out of town, and it was clear she was making it a big deal. Normally, I'd have tried to skip it, but my husband was already stressed because his mom had been guilt-tripping him hard about not prioritizing family, so I agreed. The moment we arrived, I could tell she was up to something. The house was way too clean. spotless like she'd spent days scrubbing everything down. There were decorations too, like she was throwing some fancy dinner party. The whole setup was weird. She greeted everyone like she was hosting a royal banquet, making sure to hug people dramatically and talking loud enough for the neighbors to hear. When she spotted me, she paused, smiled too wide, and said how nice it was to see me. The kind of fake sweetness that makes your skin crawl. I barely had time to process it before she suddenly took my arm and dragged me toward the kitchen. Out of nowhere, she started going on about how she'd made something special just for me. She was way too cheerful about it, like she was playing at being the gracious host, but something about it felt off. I glanced over at the counter and saw a plate of what looked like dumplings. I stared at them and my stomach turned. They weren't just dumplings, they were my dumplings. The exact same ones I'd been bringing to her house. Same folding style, same fillings, everything. I asked her where she got the recipe and she gave me this smug little shrug like it was no big deal. Said she'd been experimenting with Chinese cooking because she wanted to show how open-minded she was. The way she said it, like she was doing me a favor by copying my food. I didn't trust it. I tried to play it cool and said I wasn't very hungry, but she wasn't letting that slide. She started calling over family members, practically shoving the plate into their hands like she was handing out party favors. Everyone was going on about how great they were, how she'd done such a good job making authentic dumplings. She kept throwing me looks too, the kind that said, "See, I can do it better than you." I didn't eat a single one. My husband noticed and tried to quietly ask if I was okay, but I just told him I'd eat later. Then things took a turn. Out of nowhere, my husband's cousin, this guy in his 30s who's usually quiet, started coughing hard. He was practically gasping, clutching his throat like he couldn't breathe. A few people rushed over trying to figure out what was wrong. His wife was panicking, asking if he'd eaten anything spicy or if he had allergies. Turns out my mother-in-law had used some kind of chili paste in the dumplings, a lot of it. The cousin couldn't handle spicy food, and whatever she'd added had knocked him flat. He was gulping down water and still looked miserable. People started murmuring, asking what was in the dumplings. That's when I heard her standing in the corner saying loud enough for people to hear that my recipe must have been too strong for some people, like she was trying to pin the whole thing on me. I saw red. I marched straight over and told her those dumplings weren't my recipe. She knew it and she'd clearly messed with them. She barely even tried to argue, just smiled like she was satisfied with herself. She knew exactly what she'd done. I told my husband everything on the way home, how she'd copied my dumplings and tried to pass them off as her own, how she deliberately sabotaged them to embarrass me. He didn't even argue this time. He knew. But things didn't stop there. A few days later, my husband's aunt called me again, same one who'd warned me about the biryani incident. She told me my mother-in-law had been going around telling everyone that I had been the one trying to sabotage her, that I'd been pushing my food at family gatherings and trying to make her look bad. Apparently, she even claimed I'd brought unsafe dishes before, and that's why my husband's uncle had gotten sick. I couldn't believe it. She'd flipped the whole thing upside down, twisting everything to make herself look like the victim. Worse, a bunch of family members seemed to believe her. One of my husband's uncles sent me this long-winded message about how I should respect traditions and stop trying to challenge family dynamics. It was obvious they were siding with her. My husband was furious. He ended up confronting her directly, but of course she denied everything. Played innocent like she had no idea what we were talking about. She even started fake crying, saying she just wanted to bond with me and that I'd been the one acting cold. It was ridiculous. Like she'd spent weeks twisting everything behind the scenes, building some stupid narrative that made me the villain. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. A week later, I got a call from my mother-in-law. Completely unexpected. She told me she'd been thinking about everything and wanted to fix things. Said she wanted to invite us over for a private dinner, just the three of us, so we could talk things out. I should have said no. Every instinct told me to just ignore it, but my husband convinced me to give her one last chance, that maybe she was genuinely trying to make peace. We showed up that weekend, and the second I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house smelled off, like something burnt was hiding under layers of air freshener. My husband whispered to me to just stay calm, and we followed her into the dining room. She had this huge spread laid out, a mix of her dishes and some new Chinese recipes she claimed she'd been practicing. Everything looked strange. The sauces were too dark, the meat had this weird greasy sheen, and the vegetables looked like they'd been boiled to death. I didn't touch a thing, neither did my husband. She spent most of dinner rambling about how she just wanted us to feel like family again. She kept bringing up old stories, acting like nothing had ever happened, like she hadn't spent months messing with me. By the end of the night, she was practically begging me to eat something, kept saying how proud she was of her cooking. I refused. That's when she snapped. She slammed her fork down and started going off about how I was destroying her family. She claimed I was turning my husband against her, that I was jealous of her cooking, and that I was deliberately trying to ruin her role in the family. My husband lost it. Told her we weren't coming back unless she got her act together. We left that night and I haven't stepped foot in her house since. But something tells me this isn't over. She's not the type to just let things go, and I don't trust her not to pull something worse. After that disastrous dinner, my husband and I agreed to keep our distance. No more family dinners, no more random visits. We were done with the nonsense. His mom didn't take that well. Over the next couple of weeks, she tried to bait him into talking by sending long-winded messages about family values and how we were being selfish by shutting her out. When that didn't work, she started pulling other family members into it. His uncle called once asking if we were really going to make this a thing. His cousin texted him saying his mom was heartbroken and just wanted things to go back to normal. It felt like she was turning the whole family against us. But what really pushed things over the edge was what happened at my husband's birthday. I planned a small dinner at home, just a quiet evening with a few close friends. No big party, no fuss, just something casual and relaxed. We didn't invite his mom for obvious reasons. Neither of us wanted the headache, and honestly, I didn't think she'd even know about it. I was wrong. Halfway through the evening, there was a knock at the door. My husband opened it, and there she was, holding this massive cake in her hands like she was walking into a surprise party. Before anyone could stop her, she walked right in, smiling like she owned the place. She set the cake on the table, started greeting people, and acted like she'd been invited all along. I didn't know what to say. My husband was frozen, clearly trying to decide if he should tell her to leave or just deal with it. I figured we could power through, let her say her piece, take her cake, and go. But she didn't just say her piece. She started telling everyone about how hard the past few months had been for her, how she'd been worried sick that we were drifting away from family. She kept going on and on, painting herself as this poor mother who just wanted to be included. Then she started talking about me. She didn't mention my name directly, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She said things like, "Some people just don't understand family traditions, and certain people make things harder than they need to be." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly not sure what to make of it. At that point, I was about ready to tell her to get out, but before I could, she grabbed a knife and started cutting her cake. She handed my husband a slice like it was some peace offering and practically forced a plate into my hands too. I wasn't about to touch it. I knew better by now. My husband tried to refuse too, saying we'd just eaten, but she kept insisting, saying it was bad luck not to have birthday cake. At one point, she actually tried to joke that I'd probably prefer to bring my own. A couple of people chuckled awkwardly, but nobody really knew what to say. I was done. I set my plate down and walked out of the room. My husband followed me a few minutes later, and we both agreed we weren't touching anything she brought into our house. It wasn't until after everyone left that we noticed something weird. The cake was still on the table, barely touched, but when I went to throw it out, I realized there was a folded napkin stuck to the side of the box, almost like she'd tucked it in there on purpose. I unfolded it and my stomach turned. It was a printout of a recipe, my dumpling recipe, word for word copied down like she'd ripped it off some website. The measurements, the folding style, even the serving instructions, everything I'd been using to make my own food. There was a note scrawled on the back. I guess it's not so special after all. I couldn't believe it. She'd gone out of her way to steal my recipe, botch it at that family dinner, blame me for making people sick, and now she was still holding on to it like it was some twisted trophy. I showed my husband and we both knew this had gone way past some petty feud. She was obsessed. For the next week, we ignored every text, every call, everything. She kept trying to check in or send random messages about family dinners or upcoming events, but we weren't biting. Then one evening, my husband's cousin called. Apparently, his mom had been telling people that we'd been bullying her, that we'd been spreading lies about her cooking and intentionally embarrassing her at family gatherings. She even claimed I'd threatened her once, something about me refusing to accept her as family and telling her to stay away from her own son. I was furious. We hadn't done anything except try to avoid her, and now she was spinning some whole new story to make us look like the bad guys. I told my husband we had to cut her off completely. No more visits, no more family dinners, nothing. I didn't care what anyone else thought. That weekend, his mom showed up at our door again. No warning, no call, just knocked like she expected us to let her in. My husband opened the door and told her flat out that we weren't dealing with her anymore. She tried to push her way in, talking about making things right, but he stood his ground. Before she left, she looked past him straight at me. Then she said one last thing before turning to go. "I always win." That was it. No yelling, no argument, just those 3 words. I knew she wasn't done. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. After that visit, things felt quiet for a while. Too quiet. No texts, no calls, no family drama trickling back to us. My husband thought maybe she'd finally realized she'd gone too far. But I knew better. She wasn't the type to back off without one final move. I didn't know what it was, but something was coming. It started with small things. One afternoon, my husband's cousin, the one who'd gotten sick from her chili-loaded dumplings, randomly messaged him about a family group chat that had been buzzing for days. Apparently, his mom had been stirring things up again, claiming we'd been excluding her from the family. She told everyone we'd been avoiding events, ignoring invitations, and refusing to move on from the past. My husband tried explaining things to a few people, but it felt like they'd already made up their minds. His mom had painted herself as the heartbroken mother who just wanted her family back, and to them, we looked like the ones being unreasonable. Then things started getting weird. One evening, we came home to a gift basket on our doorstep, one of those oversized ones with wine, chocolates, and all sorts of fancy snacks. No note, no name. My husband thought it was from a friend, but I wasn't convinced. I checked every item inside, and sure enough, there was a small envelope tucked under a pack of crackers. Inside was a card that just said, "No hard feelings." No signature. We knew exactly who sent it. My husband wanted to toss it, but I convinced him to hang on to it. I didn't trust her, and I wasn't about to let her pretend everything was fine without knowing what she was playing at. A week later, we went to his aunt's birthday dinner at a restaurant. We figured it was neutral ground, no chance of his mom stirring things up. Halfway through dinner, she showed up. She wasn't even invited, just walked in like she belonged there. She went straight to my husband and loudly announced that she forgave him and was ready to move on. Everyone turned to look. And before he could say anything, she launched into this whole speech about how she'd been working on herself and wanted to make peace. She even claimed she'd started taking cooking classes. Real Chinese cooking, she added with a grin, and couldn't wait to show off her new skills. I knew it was a lie. There was no way she was suddenly this gracious, self-reflective person. She was playing nice for the crowd, trying to make us look unreasonable if we pushed back. We ignored her the rest of the evening, but as we were leaving, one of my husband's cousins pulled him aside. Apparently, his mom had told people she was planning to host a special dinner soon. Just a few people, all family, so she could show off her cooking skills and make things right. That dinner never happened. What happened instead was worse. One afternoon, we came home from work to find a letter taped to our front door. It was handwritten, long and rambling, pages full of her usual nonsense about family, tradition, and how she just wanted to bring everyone back together. But what really got me was the last part. She claimed she'd been talking to my husband's ex-girlfriend, said she'd bumped into her at a local market and invited her over for tea, claimed the ex had told her all kinds of things, that I'd been controlling, that I'd changed my husband, and that I was the reason he wasn't as close to his family anymore. I didn't believe a word of it. The ex had moved out of state years ago. There was no way she was suddenly hanging out at a random local market. It was obvious she was lying, but the fact that she'd gone that far? She wasn't just trying to embarrass me anymore. She wanted to break us up. I told my husband, and he was livid. He drove straight to her house that night and told her to stay out of our lives for good. He didn't even let her argue, just told her he was done. For a while, it felt like that might actually be the end of it. No calls, no messages, just silence. Then, about a month later, my husband's cousin called. His mom had been bragging to family that she'd finally taught me a lesson, said I'd been put in my place and that she wasn't worried about me causing problems anymore. That's when I realized what she'd done. The gift basket, the one from weeks ago. I remembered I'd left it in the garage. I ran downstairs, dug it out, and started pulling everything out. Most of it was just fancy snacks, but one thing stood out: a glass jar of homemade chutney. The label was handwritten, but not in her writing. It looked rushed, almost like someone else had scribbled it down. The lid had been glued shut, not sealed, glued. Something about it just didn't sit right. I didn't even open it. I called her cousin back and asked if she'd mentioned anything about sending food or gifts. Apparently, she'd been bragging about how she'd sent something special to remind me who knew better in the kitchen. I don't know what she put in that jar. I wasn't about to find out. We tossed the whole thing, baskets, snacks, everything, straight into the trash. The worst part? Some of my husband's family still didn't believe us. They kept saying things like, "Oh, she wouldn't do that," or "she's just being dramatic." Like somehow I was the crazy one for not trusting her. I don't know what she's planning next, but I know she's not done. Whatever this is, whatever twisted game she's playing, she's still waiting to make her next move. For weeks after the gift basket and that ridiculous letter about my husband's ex, things stayed quiet. Too quiet. No texts, no calls, just silence. My husband's cousins stopped reaching out, and it felt like half his family was keeping their distance. The tension was thick, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. As far as I was concerned, we were finally done with her. Then, out of nowhere, my husband's aunt invited us to a family barbecue. We weren't going to go at first. We figured his mom would be there and we didn't want the drama. But the aunt insisted. She promised it was just a casual get-together, nothing fancy, and told my husband his mom wasn't invited. I didn't trust it, but I knew how much my husband missed his family, so we decided to give it a shot. When we got there, everything seemed normal at first. The usual cousins were scattered around, kids running in the yard. Some of the uncles crowded around the grill. No sign of his mom anywhere, which gave me some hope that maybe things were starting to cool off. About an hour in, I went inside to grab a drink. As I walked into the kitchen, I stopped cold. His mom was there, not just hanging around quietly, but practically holding court at the table with a few of the older aunts. She was smiling like nothing had ever happened, laughing and chatting like she belonged there. I backed out before she saw me and found my husband. He didn't want to cause a scene, so we agreed to just avoid her and leave early. That should have been the end of it. But right before we were about to head out, one of his cousins called out that they were setting up the dessert table. Everyone started crowding around, and before I knew it, his mom had stepped forward carrying a big glass dish covered in foil. She set it right in the middle of the table and loudly announced she'd made something special. It was dumplings. Not just any dumplings, ones that looked exactly like the ones I'd been making for months. Same folding style, same shape, even the same little parsley garnish I usually added for presentation. I knew better than to eat them, but what set me off was what she said next. She started gushing about how she'd always loved cooking Chinese food and how she'd been practicing for months to make something that felt authentic. She even told one of her cousins that she'd been inspired by my cooking, like she was giving me some twisted compliment while taking credit for everything I'd been doing. A few people started grabbing dumplings, but I pulled my husband aside and told him we were leaving. Now. We'd barely gotten halfway to the door when his aunt called after us. She said something like, "Don't leave without trying your mother-in-law's dumplings." I turned around and sure enough, his mom was staring straight at me, smiling like she'd already won whatever game she was playing. I wasn't about to let her bait me into something stupid, so I kept walking. We made it to the car, and just as we were pulling out of the driveway, my husband's cousin came running outside waving his arms. He looked panicked, and for a second I thought something serious had happened. Turns out something had. A few people had already eaten her dumplings, and one of his uncles was violently sick, vomiting, shaking, the whole thing. They had to call for an ambulance. Later that night, his aunt called to say the uncle was stable, but the hospital confirmed it wasn't just bad food. There were traces of cleaning chemicals in whatever he'd eaten. I don't know if she did it on purpose or just screwed something up trying to copy my recipe again, but my husband wasn't taking any chances. He called his mom that night and told her flat out that we were done. No more second chances, no more conversations. He told her we wouldn't be speaking to her again, and that if she tried pulling anything else, we'd get the police involved. We blocked her number after that. I wish that had been the end of it, but a few weeks later, we found out she'd been telling people I was the one responsible for the food poisoning. Said I'd been jealous of her cooking and tampered with her food to get back at her. She told people I'd been obsessed with her and that I'd been trying to sabotage her for months. Most of my husband's cousins didn't buy it, but a few family members did. His uncle, the one who got sick, actually called me directly and demanded to know what I'd done to the food. I was furious. I told him everything. The biryani stunt, the sabotaged dumplings, the fake gift basket, the letter about my husband's ex, all of it. I think he realized how insane it sounded because he just quietly apologized and hung up. Since then, we've stayed completely cut off. My husband hasn't spoken to his mom in months, and we've avoided every family gathering just to avoid running into her. But here's the part that still makes me shake my head. About 2 weeks ago, my husband's aunt called to let us know his mom had been trying to start her own catering business. Apparently, she's been telling people she's an expert in Chinese cuisine now, going around handing out business cards and posting photos of my dumplings all over social media claiming they're hers. I don't know how far she's going to take this, but I'm done worrying about it. If she wants to build her entire life around trying to prove she's better than me in the kitchen, let her. We've made it clear that if she steps anywhere near us again, we're done playing nice. I have no idea what her end goal is, but whatever twisted game she was playing, she lost. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.